UPROPERTIES, a way of exposing C++ variables to be accessed and set in Blueprint and in your default Blueprint values. So let's have a look at the use case that we're going to be exploring. We want to migrate across some variables that are currently in Blueprint only, and we want to make them accessible to C++. So C++ needs to know about these. Particularly, I'm looking at the Blueprint grabber. So if we open up our Blueprint grabber, BP grabber, then what we will see is that there are some variables over in the My Blueprint tab, one of which is the max grab distance. And as an experiment, we're going to be migrating this across into C++, but still having all the functionality that hangs off it working in Blueprint, which you can do because Blueprint is able to access C++, but not really vice versa, not so easily anyway. And we're going to want to figure out how we can set its default value in Blueprint and how we can access it, because if I right-click on this and find references, you'll see that there are references using this in Blueprint. We want to make sure that we can carry on using it in Blueprint. So how do we do this? Let's go over to our C++ base class for the grabber.h. At the bottom of this file, we're going to add a new protected section to the C++ header. And in this protected section, I'm just going to be writing out the variables. So I'm having it as a separate section. I like to have it below my methods. That's just an organizational thing. You can put it wherever you like in your C++ class. It's not actually necessary that it's there. And so we want to put a variable in here. We know what the name's going to be. It's going to be max grab distance. But what's the type going to be? If we go and have a look in Blueprint, you can see that the type, if I'm just hovering over it, is float, but also here in the details pane where it is variable type, it's float there as well. So we can use the float variable that corresponds in C++ to give it a type. And we can also give it a default value. The default value, as it currently stands in Blueprint, is 100. So without any override from Blueprint, that is what it's going to be. But this alone is not enough, because the Blueprint system and the introspection system does not know about this variable. To do that, we need to use a preprocessor directive called UPROPERTY. And UPROPERTY we can use to annotate any variable in C++ so that the header tool can parse it and understand that this variable has some properties about it. It can use it to do serialization. It can use it to do garbage collection. And most importantly, it can expose it to Blueprint. That's why we're using it today. But to expose it to Blueprint, it's not enough just to put UPROPERTY. We also have to put some access modifiers on it. And there are a bunch of different access modifiers depending on what you want to give access to. This is the definitive list of them for you. It depends on whether we want read-only access or read-write access, first and foremost, and then also whether we want to have this access in the defaults, the instance, or the Blueprint. Now, let me just dive into that and unpack it a little bit for you. When we say in Blueprint, we mean in the Blueprint graph. So in order to access and read max grab distance here in this Blueprint function, in this graph, we need to have read access at least to Blueprint. So we're at least talking about having Blueprint read-only as one of our access modifiers. However, we also probably want to give the designers the ability to override the default max grab distance in the class defaults. The class defaults, you can see a list of all the class defaults by going to the toolbar class defaults. Then in the details pane, you will see the list of variables and their defaults, and these can be overrides from what the defaults were in C++. So, for example, the designer could set the max grab distance here to 200, and that would override what was in C++. So that's what we mean by defaults in this table. And finally, instance is when you actually put this blueprint in the world. Anything in the world outliner is an instance. So if I select one of these actors, you can see in their details pane, again, they have this list of properties and their values. And if you override anything here, this is the instance. So you can choose that you want to make it editable in defaults only, or in the instance only, or visible in the instance only, or visible in defaults only. Or you can have it visible anywhere or edit anywhere. So in our case, we do want to allow the designer to edit it both in the instance and in the defaults. And that's quite a common thing to want to do. So we can have it as edit anywhere. If on the other hand, we wanted this to be an entirely read-only property, then we would probably use visible anywhere. But that is quite common. And then we want to be able to read this from Blueprint, because at the moment, we won't be able to access this from a Blueprint graph. So for it to be readable from Blueprint, we want Blueprint read-only, because I don't actually want to give access at runtime to setting this variable, only in the defaults and in the instances in a particular map. Now with that written, we can go back to Unreal and hit compile to compile our C++, make sure it's within the main map view and not within the blueprints, because this will only compile blueprints. And when the compilation is complete, if we go back to our BP grabber, we will see that we have a compilation warning. But if we click compile, that goes away. What's actually happened here is that because we use the exact same name in C++, the blueprint variable has been renamed to max grab distance _0, just so there isn't a conflict between it and its base class C++ variable. And if we go to class defaults, you can see that we also have the grab distance 0 set up. But further down where we have a grabber section, there's another max grab distance, and this is the one from C++. What we're actually going to do is try and remove any usage of this blueprint variable, as it is confusing things now. So if we right click to find references again, and you can see it's only referenced in this one location, and the default hasn't been overridden in the class defaults or in any of the maps. If it had been overridden in the maps, it might be a little bit more difficult to go through and update all of the default values in the maps over. We can quite easily just remove this node and replace it with the max grab distance from C++, the one that doesn't have a 0 on the end, and that should replace any usages of it. So we no longer have any usages, which means that we can go ahead and delete the blueprint variable. So if we compile and save that, we should be able to go and play. I'm just going to go and hop into the village to make sure that the grabber is still working. Right click somewhere in the village and play from here. And then I'm going to go up to a pumpkin and try and grab it. So my grabber is still working, hopefully meaning that the whole movement of that variable over has indeed worked. So we've learnt about the UPROPERTY preprocessor directive and the different access modifiers that we can put in there in order to expose our C++ variables to Blueprint and have them accessed there as well as overridden.